gospel reading this morning is from Matthew, chapter 22, verses 15 to 22. That's on page 24 and 25 in the Pew Bibles. The question about paying taxes. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with parity. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is on this, and whose title?" And they answered, "The emperor's." And he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor what are the things of the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The word of the Lord for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Bernie, should you do communion now, or do you want to wait a bit?
We'll wait.
Okay. Fine. So please be seated. We see the face of God. Good morning again. This is the 19th Sunday after Pentecost. It's also Laity Sunday. And they couldn't have picked a better reading than the reading from Paul in this case, from the first Thessalonians. However, before we get to that, the Methodist Church itself is recognizing us, the laity, on this special Sunday. They're recognizing our contributions to spreading the Word of God, to Christ's mission. After all, maybe we should give ourselves a pat on the back since the church seems to be doing that. 90%, more than 90% of every congregation is made up of laity. So maybe that pat on the back is not a bad idea. But to borrow a phrase from a popular commercial, the Aleve commercial I think it is, wait a minute. We might make up 90% of the congregation, but do we make up 90% of the people who do the work of God? Maybe that pat on the back shouldn't be too hearty, because maybe we're not doing as much as we could be doing. In fact, if we're honest, we aren't doing anywhere near as much as we should be doing. Throughout the hymns this morning and the prayer from St. Ignatius, we're seeing little hints about what we could be doing more. Let's get to the reading, especially from Paul. There's 2 verses in there, actually 3, in which Paul makes it very, very clear the importance of laity. In verses 2 and 3, "We always give thanks to God for all of you." He's not singling out just a few of his leaders that he's picked to lead his new mission church up there in Thessalonica. God gives thanks for all of you for your works of faith and labors of love. Works of faith and labors of love. That's the root of things. Are we doing those things? Then in verse 7, he continues to praise them, pointing out, "You've become an example to all the believers in Macedonia," and probably to some people who were not believers too, because there were a lot of converts. Paul is challenging us here. Down through the centuries, 2,000 years ago, he's looking ahead to a time when people need to be giving this same message. It's not Macedonia anymore. It's the United States. It's South American countries. It's African countries. It's countries where the Word of God needs to be spread. Asia. This is probably a good place to put in a little plug for Prestius. You recall a few weeks ago, Bernie was pointing out how this is very much a lay organization, and it is for those of us who have been there, and I'm seeing a lot of Prestius out in the audience this morning, out in the congregation. It's very much a lay organization, and its aim is to get lay people involved in the activities of the church. Unless I misunderstood Bernie when I was talking with him privately afterwards, it sounds like in virtually all the churches he served in, the Tresdius people have been the church leaders. Now, I'm not trying to discredit some of you who are obviously church leaders who are not Tresdius, and I suspect that some of you very much want to be, and I know a few of you want to be. So maybe if we can get things to work out for you, you will become so. The work of the laity. We can do all kinds of things. We can't give communion, true. But we can do all kinds of other work, things that Paul points out. Works of faith, labors of love. And we can make ourselves examples, good examples, to the people around us. The Exodus reading also makes reference to the laity, but it's hidden. It's hidden between the lines. It's hidden in verses and chapters before today's reading and after. But I got to tell you about something. When I first found out that I'd probably be speaking today and taking the pulpit, I read over the Exodus reading for today, and I was hit not so much by Moses' intercession in the beginning of the reading, which of course is very important, but we know Moses did a lot of interceding for the Israelites because they were, quote, a stiff-necked people. Of course, if we got much better, maybe not. However, it's the end of the reading that's so striking. Here's Moses, who has served the Lord for years. He's already been through this thing of going up once on the mountain and getting the Ten Commandments, coming down and finding disaster in the Israelite camp. There's this golden calf, all kinds of people dancing about, all kinds of lewd activities, and he gets angry and breaks the Ten Commandment tablets. But now, here he is with God. He's talking one-on-one. It's like, my old friend. And after the intercessions that he does for the people to make sure that God is going to continue to lead them, he makes a request. And it's a strange request in a way, but then again, considering what Moses has done and all the miracles that he's seen and all, maybe it isn't so strange. He says, Lord, before I die, let me see your face. I mean, he's talked to God for a number of years, but he's talked to him through clouds and through fogs and through thunder in the sky. And he says, maybe just once, if I could see your face. And God says, oh friend, I know you'd like to, but understand this. You cannot see the face of God and live. But he does propose a kind of a compromise. He says, once you're up there in the mountain, there's this little cave-like, a little cleft, and he says, you get in there, and he says, I'll put my hand across the front of it to protect it. And then he says, I'll walk by. I'll shine my face on it, but then I'll walk by. And he says, you can stick your head out afterwards, and you can see the glory of me passing by from behind. And we get this image of, the typical thing we think of God, this giant figure with the flowing white robes, the long white hair, and this glory shining around him. That's the best that God is willing to do, can do for Moses. Now, when I read this, in the back of my head was that song that Mark played during the offertory. I don't know if many of you have attended Catholic funeral services, but it's a traditional song that's played. And that line about, and you shall see the face of God and live, right away that hit me from two sides. Here's God telling Moses, you cannot see the face of God and live. And here's him saying, and you will see the face of God and live. And I said to myself, what's going on here? How can this be? True, we should believe Moses more than the guy that wrote the hymn. But maybe there's something going on here. If you think about the hymn, and if you think about the context that it's usually done in, a funeral, you realize that what's being said in the hymn is, good and faithful servant, you've done these things. You've done these things all your life. You've done those works of faith and labors of love that I asked of you. And now, as you're dying, as you're dead actually in this case, because it's usually done at a funeral, you will see the face of God and you will live, but not here on earth, in heaven, in eternal glory, beholding the face of God every day. And that's what I got out of this. If you go back and look a little bit at a few of the other things in this reading, the beginning, the intercession part, and as I said, there's things going on before and after. If you think about it, Moses was really a layman. He had never been consecrated as a priest. In fact, he gave that job to and God gave that job to his brother Aaron and to the tribe of Levi, the Levites. Aaron's sons were Aaron's assistants, and then the Levites took care of all the other things, kind of like deacons and acolytes in the church that helped out with the sacred activities. So Moses himself, this towering figure in the Old Testament, was a layman. And yet think of all the things he did with God's help, with God behind him. Obviously the whole question of grace comes in here. And again, in each of the songs that we did, the hymns that we did, and the readings, we see God working for people, working to help them if they're willing. Go, Lord, I will follow if you lead me. And God does lead us every day. The opportunities are there. You know, I once saw a picture that was really, really striking. It showed Christ standing at an intersection. And behind him, there's a fork in the road. And behind him, on one side, bright sun shining, and, you know, fields and flowers and all kinds of wonderful, beautiful things. And on the other side, this dark path with clouds and blackness and everything else. And in the picture, Christ is kind of leaning toward that dark side. And there's a person standing in the middle trying to decide. And that's us. Do we take the Primrose Lane easy route? Or do we take our chances at the dark road where God is telling us to go? He's not leading us in this case. He's indicating and telling us. But it seems to me that throughout the New Testament, this concept of what to do in order to seek salvation is spelled out for us over and over and over again. I mean, look at the Beatitudes. And then, of course, tying back to the Old Testament, we have the Ten Commandments. It's all spelled out. We can see the face of God with His grace and some effort on our part and some discernment on our part. And with that, I think we shall come to an end. And Bernie, I think maybe this would be a good place to do our communion, which of course is again another pathway into that salvation.